Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to Minim Sagas. I'm the director of Tartus. My name is Tanmay Laskar, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon at St. Jerome's Catholic Church in El Cerrito for a concert of Renaissance puzzles and palindromes. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'd like to tell you a little about the program, its conception, and about some of the pieces you're going to hear today. So it's great to have you here to learn a little more about the music before we actually delve into it. A warm welcome also to those of you who are listening to us online. If you're interested in following along with the slideshow, which is presented over here, you can view a PDF of the slideshow by viewing the caption of this video down over here in the description of the video. You'll see 3 links. One for this PDF, one for the slideshow during the performance itself, and one of the concert program. So feel free to follow along if you like. The genesis of this program is from a museum that I was in The Hague last summer. It was a museum dedicated to the works of M.C. Escher. And I was looking at these beautiful prints and I was thinking, this reminds me of music. And in the next few minutes, I'd like to tell you how it reminds me of music and what the connection is between the pieces of music that we'll sing and the works of M.C. Escher. There are connections between music and art. Here are 3 possible ways in which music and art are connected. Music in the sense of sound and notes, and art in the sense of graphic art. There is perspective, which you're familiar with, and I'll talk a little more about this, proportions, and patterns. And there are ways that these aspects of music connect with similar aspects. These aspects of art connect with similar aspects in music. So we'll take these one at a time. Perspective. You're familiar with the general concept of perspective in art, where parallel lines intersect at infinity. Of course, parallel lines never intersect in real life, but that's the beauty of infinity. It can make strange things happen. This point, where the parallel lines intersect, could be a point on the horizon, in which case, do you know what it is called? In art, that point on the horizon where parallel lines intersect is called the vanishing point. Alternatively, you could be looking down a well, in which case that point is the point below your feet. Do you know what that is called? The point directly below your feet is called the nadir. Or you could be standing on top of an elevator looking up, in which case that point is the zenith, or the zenith, the point directly overhead. So the same point where parallel lines intersect can be the vanishing point, it can be the nadir, or it can be the zenith, depending upon your perspective. It's all in how you look at things. M.C. Escher played around with this concept in this lithograph from 1946 called Other World, where if you look along the sides, it's sideways, and you're looking along a tunnel, much like a coal mine. And then, that point is the vanishing point, a point on the horizon. Look at this guy over here. If you're looking from this perspective, it becomes the nadir. And if you look from this perspective, that same point becomes the zenith. So the same point through art can be viewed in 3 different ways. And this is one way that Escher brings about the aspect of perspective in a single picture. So by looking at the same picture from 3 different perspectives, it means something different. The same point means something different. This is typified in this first piece that we will sing. a piece by Yom Shao called Ma fin et mon commencement. This piece is notated for two voices. There is one voice with the text, it's called the tenor. There's another voice, and that second voice in the manuscript has a strange notation. The text underlay for the second voice is written backwards. Now you ask yourself, why would somebody write the text backwards? And the reason is that that voice is meant to be sung straight through, but also backwards from the end, straight from the beginning to the end, and also from the end to the beginning at the same time. And it works with itself. It harmonizes. As it starts, it's starting at the same time, so it harmonizes with itself all the way through. Not only that, at the same time, the bottom voice is a palindrome. It is the same as itself halfway through. So if you take the top two parts, you switch it around and you invert the top two, then you actually get what is the end of the piece. If you're not familiar with reading music notation backwards, here's what that really looks like if you turn it into the standard form of writing music. And those are the last measures of the piece, which we have generated by taking the first four measures of the piece, turning them backwards, flipping the top two parts, and we are left with the last four parts, last four measures, and it goes all the way through the whole piece. Here's another way in which perspective can be an exciting way of composing music. This is a piece for four voices. And I know it's a little hard to read here, which is why it's printed in your bulletin. If you turn to the last page of your bulletin, just before the back cover, you'll see this entire piece printed. And so you give this to singers, and they start at the beginning and they get to the end, and then they say, wait, what? Because at the end, yes, Margaret, there are clefs that are upside down. So you take the piece, you sing it, and then you turn it upside down, and you sing it backwards. So the soprano part becomes the bass part, the bass part becomes the soprano part, the tenor and alto parts get interchanged. You read the tenor part and the alto part in two different clefs now, whereas the altos are first reading their part in ordinary treble clef, they are now reading what was the tenor part backwards and upside down in baritone or bass clef, and similarly for the tenors. Now not only does this work as a piece of music, when sung backwards and upside down, it is actually exactly the same piece of music both ways. So you'll hear us sing it, and then we'll turn our scores upside down and we'll sing it backwards, and you'll see if you can follow along in your scores if you wish as we do that. So these are ways in which perspective can be brought into music. Let's now take a look at another aspect of art and bring that into music, the concept of proportions. Of course, Escher was the master of proportions. We shall see about that. I will be right back. Right, we're talking about proportions. Now Escher, of course, was the master of proportions. And he made this print in 1926 called Smaller and Smaller and Smaller. And in this print, you can see these lizards that start off large on the sides, and then as they get to the center, it becomes smaller and smaller. That's the origin of the title. And in this print, you have three aspects. You have periodic space filling. So we take an image, in this case a lizard, printed in a particular fantastical fashion. And we tile the space with the same image of the lizard rotated at different angles. And then, not only that, we actually make it smaller as we get to the center, and it all works out. And in this case, we have another vanishing point. Just like the perspective picture I showed you earlier. So in the case of art, these aspects of proportions are pretty apparent. Let's see if it's possible, what it might look like to have proportions in music. Here is a particularly interesting example. How many of you are familiar with this piece by Johannes Ockeghem? It's called Missa Prolationum. Mirka, you seem to have heard of it. Has anyone else seen this piece? I will let you ponder this piece for a moment as I go hunting for the power chord. This piece has, in principle, you look at it and you say, okay, there is this medieval notation, there's this big K at the beginning, and there's the first letter or the first word, Kyrie. That's what this huge glyph is. After that, we have our regular 5-line staff, which subsequently became modernized in modern music. And then we have this C here, that's a clef. And so everything along this line, the bottom line, is a C. And then we have these notes, which are of course the precursors to modern day notes. A little bit of music theory here for a moment. This first note is called a breve. This diamond-shaped note, this is the 5th note along here, is called a semibreve. And semibreve doesn't mean that there are 2 semibreves in the breve. There could be 2, there could be 3. And I'll get to that in a second. And then the last note on that staff is called a minim. So there is the breve, the semibreve, and the minim. Now in addition, do you notice anything else on this staff besides the notes and the lines?
I didn't hear what the...
Do you notice anything else on the staff besides the notes and the lines?
There's little sort of like hash lines. I don't know if those are...
Little sort of hash line.
Well, I mean the little...
Stems.
There are stems, yes.
Well,
Notes have
there's the
stems.
but then, okay.
Oh, the tempo sign.
The tempo signs, yes. These 2 things over here, the circle and the C. Those are what are called mensuration symbols. So this is, this tells you how many semibreves there are in a breve. A circle means that there are 3 semibreves in a breve, and a C means that there are 2 semibreves in a breve. So if you just had a circle, you would say this goes yum pam 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 pam, and by rules of what's called alteration, this rest is 1 semibreve. This semibreve becomes this semibreve becomes doubled. So it goes yum pam 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 yum pam pam pam. However, at the same time, there is another symbol here, and so you could ignore the circle and you could read it in the C, and you could go yum pam 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 pam. So it just goes straight. Semibreve, 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 per breve, and then it doesn't get doubled. The exciting thing about this music, the way it's written, is that you and I could take this, so Margaret and Medica, you could take this piece And you could say, I'm going to read it in a circle and I'm going to read it in a C. And you could start at the same time. And one of you will be faster than the other and one of you will be slower. But it will all work out as long as you keep your semi-breaths together. And of course, the person who's counting 3 instead of 2 is a little slower, usually by about 50%. But as I noted, sometimes things get altered and sometimes they don't. This is the way the notation works. So it's not exactly a 3-to-2 relation. It just gets longer and longer, of course, but it's not always exactly 3-to-2. But it's just use the notation and use the rules of the notation and read it, and it turns into a piece of music. Now, you may not be familiar with this particular notation. I've explained it in some detail. Here's what it looks like in modern notation. So you can see this bottom part goes yam pam 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 pam. The top part on the other hand goes pam 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 pam, etc. etc. And the two eventually line up in a few places, and a few places they don't. But the minims will be together. So when you're singing this piece, count minutes. And we'll sing this piece and we'll be counting minutes. Now, so that's one piece with 2 parts which are sung at different tempi. Not only that, if you look to the right side of the manuscript, there are 2 more parts. And those 2 other parts have 2 yet different mensuration symbols. And of course, these parts work together, again, just like these parts work together, and all 4 of the parts start at the same time, and they are in 4 different mensurations, and they are sung at exactly the same time. And they are sung at 4 different tempi. Here's a way that Johannes Ockeghem in the 15th century was using proportions to write exciting music. And this is what that looks like in modern notation. So you can see these are the top 2 parts that I showed you earlier, and these are the bottom 2 parts on the right side of the manuscript that start at the same time. Ockeghem has yet another trick up his sleeve. He is not done yet. He says every time you come to a pause, the follower ascends by a step, which means that you will sing in canon, start at the unison, the first canon, the second canon start a whole step apart, the third canon start a third apart, etc. So when you get to the second Kyrie, so after the first Kyrie there's a Christe, which is a step apart. In the second Kyrie, it's a minor third apart. And that's the second Kyrie, and you can see these 2 parts are a third apart, these 2 parts are a third apart. And they are actually reading the same manuscript, the same notation, in 2 different tempi, and also in 2 different prolations, 2 different mensurations, and 2 different pitch centers, 2 different clefs. There's actually a different set of clefs here for the 2 parts. So that's one way that you can bring. Sir?
Is it possible for you to use a microphone?
Is it possible for me to use a microphone? I'm afraid not. There is not a sound system in the church that I could use. I will just try to speak slowly and clearly.
Thank you.
This is one way that one could use proportions in music. Here's another way. This is a piece by Antoine Binois. This is the second piece in the program. And in this piece, the excitement is in the text and also in the way the measures are laid out. So the text is in your program. So take a look at the text and the translations. This piece talks about Pythagoras. How many of you know the legend behind Pythagoras and music? Ben, you heard the legend.
All I remember is that pleasing intervals are ratios of numbers, not everything.
Pleasing intervals are small integer ratios of small integers. So, for instance, there is the diapason, which is a 2:1, the hemiola, which is a 3:2, and that's the octave and the fifth, respectively. There's the diatessaron, which is 4:3, or the fourth. The epoptos, the 9:8, which is a whole step. And the legend is that Pythagoras was walking around on the streets doing Pythagorean things as he was wont to do, and he came across a blacksmith, and the blacksmith was hitting hot iron with a hammer. And ostensibly, due to differences in the kind of hammer that he was using, or the weight of the hammer, or what he was hammering, he could hear intervals. And he figured that it was due to differences in the ratios of the pitches that it was producing pleasing sounds. So this text, which is a setting by Antoine Brunois, talks about ratios, interesting ratios, and there are these, he mentions all these ratios, so as we go along, see if you can find where we sing those particular words, which is not words that you find in Latin very often. Interestingly, there is some more number stuff in this piece. The second half of this piece, which we will not get to unfortunately, there are 81 measures. That is also the time during which Brunois pays homage to Ockeghem, Johannes Ockeghem. And in that text it begins with Hec Ockeghem, this Ockeghem, so on and so forth. Interestingly, if you take the word Ockeghem and you use the Latin letter association, so A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, so on and so forth, and you add up those numbers, you get 81. So 81 is the number equivalent of Ockeghem. And here, Brunois is talking about Ockeghem. Also, if you take the word Johannes, okay, if you take the first 32 notes in the top two parts, they are exactly in common. So the first 10 measures or so of the cantus and altus parts have exactly 64 notes in common, 32 each. If you take the word Johannes and you do that same number connection, you get 64. So 64 and 81 are numbers that are related to Johannes Ockeghem, and the piece is about Johannes Ockeghem. Not only is 81 to 64 important for Johannes Ockeghem, is also the square of 9 to 8, which of course is the whole step in Pythagorean music. This sort of numerology is brought to another exciting conclusion in this piece by Thomas Tallis for 7 voices. In this piece, the top 2 parts are in canon. They are the same as each other, half a measure apart. And that's pretty easy to see. On the other hand, these bottom 5 parts have 4 parts in common. Can you see what the common things are between 4 out of the bottom 5 parts? I'll give you a minute. Any ideas? Yes, penses, different speeds and inverted, and that is exactly right. So, look at this part, the third line from above. It is the discantus part. The discantus part starts with an A, followed by an F, followed by a C, in just the first measure. Now look at the contratenor part directly below. You have an A, you have an F, followed by, there's a line missing. There's an A, followed by an F, followed by a C. It's just a projection issue. And so these notes are the same as those notes. So the discantus part, the contratenor part, is the same as the discantus part, sung 4 times as slow. Not only that, you could take the discantus part and you could generate the basso secundus part by singing this not only twice as slow but upside down, which means you start on the A, where the discantus goes down to an F, down by a third, the bass part goes up by a third. This is the technique of perarsing et thessin. Every time one part goes up, the other part goes down by corresponding interval. So this part is generated from this part, perarsing et thessin, at twice as slow. This part is generated also from this part, perarsing et thessin, also and 8 times as slow. So these 1, 2, 3, 4 parts are generated from the same this cantus part by singing it at different tempi and singing it either per Arsena or as written. And here's so that's another exciting way you can generate music from music by changing the proportions. And finally, for a last example of proportions, here is another piece which I have written for this concert. How many parts do you think this piece is for?
Not 3.
Not 3. There are 3, yes. So I asked you the question and it is a trick question. There are 3 notated parts and indeed there are more than 3 parts. Any ideas as to how many parts this might be? Shout out a number. 72. Not quite. How many people think it's for 3? 4 parts. 5. One person thinks it's okay. No, 5 parts. 6 parts. Mark thinks it's for 6 parts. 7 parts. Ben thinks it's for 7 parts, and Margaret thinks it's for 7 parts. 8 parts. Hi, I don't know your name, but you think it's for 8 parts. 9 parts. Chris thinks it's for 9 parts. Christian thinks it's for 9 parts, and Bob thinks it's for 9 parts. And Sean thinks it's for 9 parts. 10 parts. 11 parts. Alrighty. Is that the real answer is somewhere in there? So, Margaret, where do you think the 7 parts are? If you said it's 7 parts, where are the 7 parts?
Pure guesswork.
Pure guesswork. Mark, you said it was 6 parts. Where are the 6 parts?
They're some kind of counter to the 3. So they're obviously not C, but they're doing these same kind of, you're taking the box. So they're doing something different from the same music.
Yeah, so you're saying we just take the 3 parts and we double them. 3 times 2 is 6, therefore there are 6 parts. There is some information in the music itself to give you an answer to that question. So if you look along the second line, you will see 3 little symbols here. And those 3 symbols are clefs. The first one is a treble clef, an octave down, the same clef as this one. Which means that when this part gets to that note, somebody else starts singing that same part from the beginning. Similarly, when that first part gets to this point, somebody else starts singing that same part up an octave. And when that part gets here, yet another person, a 4th person, starts singing yet that same part also up an octave. So this part generates 3 other parts, just that one part. So you get 3 plus 3 and that's 6. In addition, if you look at the beginning of this system, you will notice 2 mensuration signs. Which means that that part is meant to be sung at 2 different tempi, like the octave. 2 different mensurations. And so if you put it all together, you get 7 parts. And we'll try to keep them all straight when we sing them. Alright. You can generate music from music, and you can generate music from art. But can you generate art from music? What you could do is you could take the notes and you could color them by a color that corresponds to each pitch. For instance, you could color all the D green, all the D's green, and all the F sharps blue. And if you do that, you can generate that. And that you will recognize from the front of your concert program. And indeed, if you lay out your concert program flat, in the middle you will see Talus's Miserere Nostri, the 7-part piece with all those canons, laid out in its entirety, with the text. Let's end with the concept of patterns. We've talked about proportions and perspective. Of course, Escher was a master of patterns, such as in this periodic space filling diagram called square limit. And here, the vanishing points are along the edges. If you look carefully at this picture, you can find at least 2 different points of symmetry, where 4 heads meet and where 3 wings meet. And in the center, those three wings are actually four wings because of the symmetry, the fourfold symmetry of the system. Similarly, you can, so in this system, you can use symmetry to generate order. It's also possible to use symmetry in music to generate order. Here are 6 or 8 measures or so, starting at measure 10 from Zarlino's setting of Paternoster. Zarlino was a theorist and he did fun theoretical things with music. And in this case, you will notice when we sing, and you can notice from here, line 2, 4 and 5 are exactly the same, but they are sung at different pitch levels. So they are in what are called canons, and start at different times, and they start at different pitches, but they're exactly the same in terms of intervallic content. So if there's a minor third in one voice, there's a minor third in another voice, which means that those 3 parts have 3 different key signatures. One has one extra sharp, one has one extra flat, and it all works out. There are other ways to have canons. You can have canons that are multiple running at the same time. So here's a piece by Jean Bouton. The bottom 4 parts are echoed by the top 4 parts 2 measures later and an octave above. The beautiful thing about this sort of echoing is that it generates interesting colors and interesting timbres in the music. And so you can generate color also from playing around with proportions and perspective and patterns in the music. Now, of course, we started with Machaut's Marfin, the text of which reads, "My beginning is my end, and my end is my beginning, said no waterfall ever, except this one painted by M.C. Escher." The exciting thing about this waterfall, as you might have seen, is that it starts over here, it climbs to the top, falls back down, and it starts again. It's a cyclical water flow, a perpetual motion machine that never ends. My beginning is my end, and my end is my beginning, and so we shall end with another setting of Marfin et Commencement, which I have written, where I have taken the 3 voices of the Machaut, where, as I said, the top 2 parts are the same as each other backwards, the bottom part is the same as itself backwards. To that, I have added 3 more voices, the 2 of which are the same as each other backwards, and the 6th of which is the same as itself backwards. My beginning is my end, and my end is my beginning. Welcome to Minim Sagas once more. Have a great show.